Prynawn da.
Good afternoon.
Galwaf, Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru I Drefn. An item 1,
Item 1, questions to the First Minister. Question 1, Weinidogion.
What assessment has the First Minister made of the impact that the transition to the personal independent payment is having on people in Wales?
Well, like other aspects of the UK Government's welfare reform, we're still awaiting detailed information on personal independence payments from DWP. When that is available, the impact will of course be considered by our Ministerial Task and Finish Group for Welfare Reform.
Thank you, First Minister. You'll probably be aware that the Public Accounts Committee in Westminster recently described the PIP rollout as a fiasco. In Torfaen, I've got constituents who've been waiting 6, 7, 8 months and more for a decision on their PIP payments, with no end in sight. Someone approached me recently who's having delays because the medical assessor failed to send their paperwork on to the DWP, and the contact email address supplied by Capita regularly bounces back inquiries, despite my office having raised this issue with them on a number of occasions. First Minister, what steps are you taking to monitor the impact of this change on people in Wales? And what are you doing to lobby the UK Government for urgent improvements to a system that's clearly failing people who really need support?
Well, in February of this year, we published a report on the impact of the welfare reforms in Wales as a whole, and indeed at local authority level. That forms part of the programme of research commissioned by the Ministerial Task and Finish Group that I referred to. And that research assessed the impact of 14 benefit and tax credit changes, including the replacement of the DLA with the PIP. But I note, of course, what Westminster's Public Accounts Committee has said. Yes, it is nothing short of a fiasco, but the serious point is that some of our most vulnerable people in society are being let down by a system that is untested and failing.
Disabled people being given long-term and conditional support through employment support allowance has increased, a scheme of course introduced by the previous government. But taking a more open approach, the cross-party group on disability, which has been co-chaired by myself and colleague Rebecca Evans prior to her recent elevation, has been in dialogue with the DWP over personal independent payments for some time. And equally, the Council Support in Wales would tell me they've been working with DWP officers to influence this agenda. What, therefore, dialogue has the Welsh Government had, or could it have, with these third sector organisations who are actively working to address the problems with delays and hopefully, therefore, deliver better services for the people that we all share concerns for?
Well, the member talks as if his party bears no responsibility at all for the shambles that we see before us. We will, of course, work with any third sector organisation to try and address the shambles that his party have themselves introduced. I'd remind him that in 2018 it's expected there'll be about 42,500 fewer claimants in Wales under the new system compared to the DLA. And the average annual loss for those who lose entitlement is estimated to be around £3,600. That is not the fault of this government, nor of the party I represent. It's the fault of his.
Lindsay Whittle.
Thank you, Llywydd. Well, First Minister, I appreciate and understand your exasperations and concerns that the Welsh Government, of course, has no control over the United Kingdom's government switch from disability living allowance to the personal independence payment. However, this switch is now happening, and can you please tell us what the Welsh Government will be doing? I am more concerned with people suffering from serious mental health problems, and how can you monitor and help those, please? Appreciating fully your genuine concerns on this.
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there is a Ministerial Task and Finish group. It is assessing the impact of the welfare reforms, and we will continue to lobby on behalf of those most vulnerable, including, of course, those who suffer from mental health problems.
Question 2, Alan Frere-Jones.
Diolch. Am wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad ar y gyllideb ar gyfer dysgu Cymraeg i oedolion.
Yn dilyn trafodaethau eang,
Following extensive discussions, we have taken the difficult decision to reprioritise funding in order to boost the language in the economy and in the community. The Welsh for Adults Centres have been informed that we are reducing their allocations by an additional 7% for the 2014-15 academic year.
Mae'r golled yn debyg o fod 700,000
The loss is likely to be some £700,000, as I understand it. A few weeks ago you were announcing, of course,
yn y gwariant
an increase
in
expenditure on the mentrau iaith by £1.5 million, and some would say that this is highly cynical and shifts money from one budget to another. On what basis was this decision taken, and how does the government intend to reach its objective in increasing the number of Welsh speakers by cutting the budget for Welsh for adult learning?
Well, first of all, we must ensure that there are sufficient resources to teach Welsh to children. But if I may say, I said in the chamber regarding the last statement I made that it wasn't new funding, that it had been diverted from other places in the budget. I said that some was new funding, but not the funding for the mentrau iaith. The challenge that we face is that those who can speak Welsh actually do that, and that they transfer the language to the next generation. And bearing that decision in mind, that's the decision I took.
Pa fath o drafodaeth eang a gewswch chi cynidori gyllideb Cymraeg i oedolion, ac yn benodol, ydych chi wedi colli cyfle i roi sgiliau yn yr iaith, i athrawon ysgolion cynradd Saesneg, i ei helpu nhw defnyddio Cymraeg achlysurol yn y dosbarth?
Well, no, the usual discussions took place within the government, but of course, as the member knows, a review has taken place of the curriculum in Wales, and Welsh as a second language is part of that. And I've said a number of times in this chamber that it's important that we create confident Welsh speakers in the English medium schools too. It can be done, and I've seen it being done at least in one school in Wales.
Simon Thomas?
Diolch, Llywydd. Thank you very much, sir. You just admitted, First Minister, that this is shifting money from one part of the budget to another, but I'm sure you'd also accept that a cynhadledd fawr that you held over the period of a year asking these questions stated clearly that we needed to spend money on Welsh for adults and to support them in their communities and to support adults to learn Welsh, because it is very hasty to believe that you can move from one to another when these adult learners are parents to children going through Welsh medium education and are people who are learning in their communities, thereby keeping the language alive in those communities. Will you therefore reconsider this strategy for the future?
Well, of course, the problem that we have is the financial position. That if there was sufficient funding available, the decision would have been different, but that is not the position we find ourselves in, and therefore we as a government have to prioritise those things that, in our view, are important at present, namely, of course, to secure the future of the mentrau iaith, secure the use of the Welsh language in parts of Wales, such as the Teifi Valley, and that is the priority at present.
We now move to questions for party leaders, and this afternoon, standing in to the Leader of the Opposition, have Paul Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For the record, can the First Minister give me the latest mortality figures for the Princess of Wales Hospital?
Could I welcome the member back to his position that I know many in his group think he should have held in the first place, but these are not matters for me. I know the mortality rates in the Princess of Wales Hospital certainly are not ones that give us cause for concern. What the figures are offhand, I could not tell him, but I can write to him about that.
Well, let me help the First Minister, because he clearly doesn't know the answer to my first question. The mortality figure is 105 for the Princess of Wales Hospital. And let me remind the First Minister and the Chamber about mortality data in other hospitals. The latest mortality figure for Glangwili Hospital is 130, and at Neath Port Talbot it's 127. Any figure over 100 should be a cause for concern. The report by Professor Andrews into events at ABMU clearly showed that problems exist within our health boards. Now, even a member of your own party, First Minister, the highly respected Anne Clwyd, said, and I quote, "It is not surprising that people are worried about what is actually going on. This is horribly similar to the murkiness that surrounded the mortality statistics for mid-staffs," unquote. Now, the First Minister whipped his Assembly members to block her evidence twice, and tomorrow she will finally appear in front of the Assembly's Health committee. Will he now listen to her and to her evidence?
Let's see what she says. I mean, first of all, the member has to remember he cannot selectively quote the Andrews report at me. The Andrews report was absolutely clear that it was not a mid-staff situation. He cannot refer to that report and then pretend that something is in it that is not in it. And I have to point out to him that his party, as we see from the news reports across the border, is presiding over something critically bad as far as the health service is concerned there.
Well, here we go again. The First Minister obviously prefers to talk about the health service in England. And let me remind him, he is the First Minister of Wales, but he clearly wants to talk about England because perhaps he's ashamed to talk about the Welsh Health Service. Now, First Minister, it's now been exactly a year since we, on this side of the chamber, called for a Keogh-style inquiry to take place here in Wales. For a whole year, you and your government have made excuses. You first stated that it would cost too much. Since then, we've had the Andrews report into the truly shocking examples of bad practice at Princess of Wales. We've had some of the worst mortality figures in the UK, and even Sir Bruce Keogh has said there needs to be further investigation. A year has been too long for patients across the whole of Wales, First Minister. Will you now commit to holding an inquiry and sort this mess out once and for all?
He has some nerve in accusing me of referring to England when his own Prime Minister went on and on and on and on about Wales. When the Secretary of State for Wales went on and on and... Sorry, former Secretary of State for Wales went on... There's only the grin on that bench is. On and on and on about Wales. His own Prime Minister debased himself by coming to Wales and saying, and I quote, that Offa's Dyke is the line between life and death. And yet he accuses us of trying to divert attention away from the health service. The reality is that the situation in England is shocking. And whenever they attack the health service in Wales, you can guarantee it's to move attention away from what they are doing as a party across the border. On and on they go about having a public inquiry. We've had the Andrews report. We know and have been open about the challenges in the health service in Wales. It's a shame his party is so secretive about what happens in England where they are in charge.
We now move on to the Welsh Liberal Democrats, and this afternoon we have standing in for the leader, Aled Roberts.
Diolch. Prif Weinidog, yn ôl y mis Mawrth, wrth ymateb i Kirsty Williams, fe ddwedwch eich bod chi a'r Gweinidog Iechyd yn ymwybodol o'r amseroedd aros ar gyfer gwasanaethau psychiatric plant a'r glaswyd. 3 mis yn ddiweddarach, fe cyhoeddwyd ffigurau dyddiau gwella yn deud bod y sefyllfa'n gweithlygu, cynnydd o dros 120% o flwyddyn i flwyddyn, yn nifer y bobl ifanc sy'n aros mwy na 4 wythnos ar ddeg am driniaeth. Pam felly, dyw eich llywodraeth chi dal methu darparu cymorth mewn da bryd i'r bobl ifanc mwyaf bregus pan maen nhw angen cymorth?
Well, as regards young people, particularly with the psychiatric services, we know that the health boards are aware of this issue and they're taking steps at present in order to ensure that matters improve. Having said that, of course, it's true to say that across the whole of the health service there is greater demand on services, and we as a government are ensuring that more funding is available in order to meet those challenges.
Ond cwestiynu os oes na weithredu ar ran y llywodraeth dwi, ac os oes na bwysau yn cael ei rhoi ar y byrddau iechyd, achos mae na feisydd eraill o fewn y gwasanaeth iechyd yma yng Nghymru, lle mae amseroedd aros yn gweithio'n arw, a lle mae'n amlwg bod eich llywodraeth yn methu gweithredu. Wythnos diwethaf fe gafwyd adroddiad gan yr Ombudsman, Betsy Cadwaladr, oedd yn sôn am wasanaethau ophthalmoleg. Ar draws Cymru, mae nifer y cleifion sy'n aros dros 9 mis am eu hapwyntiad cyntaf wedi cynyddu dros 130% i 1,010. Pam nad oes modd i chi sicrhau fel llywodraeth triniaeth amserol i bobl hynny o ran gwasanaethau ophthalmegol lle mae na beryg bod yn colli
The problem with the ophthalmic services is that there are excessive numbers of patients being referred to specialists prematurely, and there are too many people having to
a wedyn ni dim yn digwydd, a wedyn ni mynd i weld nhw tol ail tro trydydd tro. Mae'n rhaid newid y ffordd mae hwn yn digwydd, a sicrhau bod mwy o bobl yn gallu cael ei gofalu amdano gyda doctoriaid, gyda optometrists, achos nhw sy'n ar gallu mwyn gofalu am bobl, a wedyn ni cyfeirio at yr arbenigwyr pan mae'r amser yn iawn. Nid felly mai ym hwnna'n yn Gymru, am hwnna'n gwrnewid.
When the time is right. That is not the case in lots of areas of Wales, and it has to change.
Which are of concern in certain areas. For example, research that we've recently undertaken indicates that children in Hywel Dda local health board are waiting nearly 5 months for hearing tests. Ear, nose and throat referrals in Abertawe Bro Morgannwg are taking over 8 months. And even if you manage to get into the system, if you need a hearing aid reassessment in Cwm Taf LHB, then you have to wait an incredible 17 months for your second appointment. First Minister, month after month, year after year, you stand there telling us to wait and it will all get better. The question is, how much longer do the people of Wales have to wait before they see an improvement under this government?
The member will forgive me if I'm sceptical of Lib Dem research figures. There are many of us in this chamber who will know what it's like to be told that as a result of a by-election the Lib Dems will sweep the board in Wales. There are others in other parties who will have the same experience. But he asks an important question, I understand that, and I can say to him that government officials will shortly be meeting with stakeholders across Wales to do a stocktake of what is happening in audiology services as the basis of establishing what may be needed to enhance service quality further. We are aware of the problems in Cwm Taf. The Health Board does have an action plan in place to reduce the number of patients waiting over 14 weeks for reassessment, and we expect that action plan to deliver.
We now move on to the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Liam Wood.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, the UK Parliament is expected to rush through legislation today that includes wide-ranging powers for the state to intercept and retain communications. Now, there are clauses in this bill which have previously been struck down by the Court of Justices of the European Union, and there is widespread concern that such legislation should not be rushed through. Do you believe, as Plaid Cymru does, that this legislation breaches individual civil liberties?
Well, any legislation must be compliant, in my view. I don't think it's the European Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, and the convention rights that exist as a result of that. As we in this chamber have to ensure we do not pass legislation that it infringes upon those rights, I believe Westminster must be careful not to do the same.
I wonder then if the First Minister could tell us whether or not this Assembly and your government has been consulted on this legislation, and whether you believe that you should be consulted as a matter of course on emergency legislation of this nature.
No, we have not been consulted, and I think it's good practice to ensure that the devolved administrations are aware of what is planned, and we are consulted on non-devolved issues when it comes to the justice system, and I think it's good practice to do that for all matters such as this.
I agree with you, First Minister, because this legislation will affect every single citizen in Wales and in the rest of the UK. Now, as you keep reminding us, you are the leader of Welsh Labour. I wonder if you can therefore tell us, will Welsh Labour MPs this afternoon be voting for this bill today? And also, I wonder if you can tell us, will they be voting for the amendment which includes the sunset clause?
Well, I mean, just to explain the way things work in my party, the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Welsh Labour MPs, of course, in Parliament are subject to the whip of the UK Labour Party, as members here, Welsh Labour members here, are subject to the whip of the Welsh Labour leadership here. It's a long-established principle in my party that when it comes to devolved matters, these are matters for me as the leader of my party. For non-devolved matters, they are primarily matters for the UK Labour Party leader, even though, of course, there is constant dialogue in terms of ensuring that the boundary between the two moves further in the direction which I would hope that it would.
Thank you. We now move back to questions on the paper. Question 3, Bethan Jenkins.
Will the Minister make a statement on NHS complaints redress procedures in Wales?
Yes, the independent review was published on the 2nd of July, and we will set out our formal response to the review in the autumn following a period of wider engagement.
Thank you, and I look forward to that response. Last week, one of my constituents had last received answers about the care of her mother, some 2 years after she had first raised the matter with ABMU. The process of working with the LHB to get some of those answers took over their lives of the family. Do you believe that, does the government agree that such a long and convoluted process needs to be changed when you look at this particular complaints procedure, especially with regards to families facing brick walls and defensive managerial structures? And therefore, do you condemn the comments made by Professor Andrews recently, observing that some of the campaigners, some of the families were a vexatious minority because, of course, they don't want to be campaigners. They want to make sure that their loved ones are supported and respected, and so far many of our health boards have failed on that level.
No, I don't condemn Professor Andrews. Either you accept the report or you don't. You can't accept parts of it and not others. The point that is made about the complaint system taking too long is a fair one, in my view. I think part of the issue with the complaints process has been that it has been too strongly anchored to legal proceedings, and I think there must be ways of ensuring that people can have their complaints heard more quickly without the fear that somehow dealing with a complaint in that way will lead to legal proceedings in the future. In my experience, that's not what most people want. They're not looking for compensation, they're just looking for answers and to make sure that such a thing doesn't happen again. And certainly there are lessons there that we will consider as a government in order to make sure that the complaints process is treated far more quickly, but also to move it away from the legal world, if I can put it that way, where there's no desire on either party for that to happen.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, not only are people waiting too long to have their concerns and complaints addressed in the Welsh NHS, but we also know that the review undertaken by Keith Evans concluded that there seems to be data showing recurrent themes and repetition of errors. What specific action do you intend to take as a Welsh Government to ensure that when mistakes happen, they actually, that the NHS actually learns lessons from those mistakes and doesn't repeat them over and over again?
Well, I've already said, Llywydd, that of course there will be a formal response to the review. It wouldn't be right now to deal with parts of it in isolation rather than dealing with the review as a whole.
Question 4, please, Black.
Thank you, Presiding. What plans does the Welsh Government have to reform leasehold tenures?
It's unclear whether this is devolved. Not a phrase that members will be unfamiliar with in this chamber. So at this moment in time, there are no plans to reform leasehold tenures given the ambiguity over whether they are devolved or not.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. You'll be aware of the controversy in my region, in the former Elba Works estate in Gowerton, regarding the leaseholds there, where residents have effectively found their annual rent of £50 being increased up to about £3,000. I understand this is, of course, a local issue, and I'm asking you to intervene in that. But will the Welsh Government review the lessons from that particular issue when it comes to look at future legislation in terms of leasehold, to see whether there are other instances of where that occurs and whether it can be prevented in the future?
Well, I understand in relation to the issue that the member has raised that no decision has been finalised, and there are discussions taking place at the Council, and that clearly must be welcomed. But of course, what isn't clear is what the extent of the powers of this chamber are when it comes to leasehold. I asked this very same question this morning, and it's quite clear that there's, again, no clear answer. I hope certainly that when we see the second Wales Bill introduced after the next general election, that this and other matters will be clarified as quickly as possible.
Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. Well, in addition to leaseholders on the Elba estate in Gowerton, we understand that leaseholders of flats in Cumbran, Bronavon Housing Association, have faced bills of between £11,000 and £30,000 for repairs to their properties. I know that these issues were raised with general support from AMs and MPs in 2012 in a Centre Forum think tank report with general cross-party agreement that action is required. The UK Government is looking to a redress scheme for leaseholders. What action will the Welsh Government take at a devolved level to address these problems?
Well, again, it comes back to the point as to whether it's devolved or not. And I'm sure the member will join me in welcoming clarification in any new Wales bill. The difficulty is, of course, that the leasehold system is a capricious system. it can lead and has led to situations, as we see here, where there are substantial increases in ground rent that people have to face. It's very difficult, of course, for the government or indeed the Assembly to give views on what it might do when it's not yet clear what the extent of the competence of the Assembly is.
Question 5, Gwyn Price.
Thank you, Clywyd. What's the Welsh Government doing to promote tourism in Islwyn?
Well, much is done to promote tourism in Islwyn and the wider area. Of course, the member has the Cwmcarn Forest Drive, which is a proud part of the Islwyn constituency, and he will be aware, of course, of attractions around Islwyn in the neighbouring constituency of Caerphilly and further north, of course, that all contribute money to the economy of Islwyn and the surrounding area.
Thank you for that answer. And perhaps you've just answered my next question. With Cardiff and Newport being so close, and my community are very close to these cities, what are we doing to promote the Welsh and the Gwent valleys?
Well, the Valleys Regional Park seeks to coordinate, to drive and to promote activities relating to the environment and heritage across all the valleys of South Wales. It has a £400,000 budget over a 2-year period, and that is intended, of course, to help with marketing. There is a website, and certainly since 2009, the Valleys Regional Park has invested £18 million in tourism infrastructure across the valleys.
Lindsay Whittle.
Well, First Minister, you're right. There are lots of historical and indeed natural gems in Islwyn. I could, of course, refer to the mill at Gelli Groes, where Artie Moore picked up the first distress signals of the sinking Titanic. But unfortunately, these hidden gems are actually just that. They're hidden because we don't shout about them enough. Considering Visit Wales only spends £7 million a year in advertising Wales abroad compared to £47 million a year by Visit Scotland, how do you expect the wealth of historical and natural treasures in the valleys to get the attention they rightly deserve?
Well, the total tourism spend in Wales is over 20 million, not 7 million. If you take into account the spending on major events, the tourism grants, and that's not even counting the money, for example, the money that's being invested in the airport in Cardiff, which will all help to give those visiting Cardiff a far better experience of Wales. The total spend is well over 20 million if you take all these things together. And it's evidenced by the fact, of course, that we've seen tourism numbers increase in Wales, and Wales is now seen as a cool destination, to quote a paper I don't normally read, the Telegraph, last week. And we have seen Wales and parts of Wales, such as Rosilly Beach, for example, being named in world guides. And that's a sign that we are building a strong tourism industry in Wales based on the expenditure that we have, which is 20 million and more.
Question 6, Byron Davis.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, would you make a statement on the future of public transport in Wales, please?
Yes, we're committed to improving public transport services in Wales.
Thank you. First Minister, I want to raise concerns that Age Cymru have. They are extremely concerned that local bus services remain vulnerable to spending cuts. And you'll appreciate, of course, that there is a danger that reductions to services mean that access to a whole range of things can become impossible for some older people. I believe firmly that cuts and changes to bus services should be subject to an equality impact assessment into the effect they will have on older people. Given that the government has just U-turned on the funding cut to concessionary fares following the High Court action, will you make a statement on the future of free bus travel and whether your government will fund adequately to ensure a sustainable bus network to support many elderly, vulnerable residents, particularly in rural areas, who rely on their local bus service?
Well, of course, the free bus pass scheme in Wales is far more generous than exists across the border. That is something that people have very much welcomed. There are 720,000 concessionary pass holders in Wales, and the 3-year package that funds that is worth £189 million. It's one of the proudest achievements for those of us on our benches here, something that was done at a time when the powers of this place were particularly limited. I can say to the member that the Minister has recently announced a £15.4 million funding boost for transport schemes in Wales. That has been done. We've allocated £350,000 to support the Booker bus service between 2012 and 2015. And, of course, the Minister has established a bus policy advisory group which will draw on best practice in order to ensure that we have the bus services that we need to ensure that people are able to access the services that they require.
Julie Hogan.
Presiding Officer. The City of Cardiff Council will shortly begin a consultation on the site for the new bus station in Cardiff, now that the BBC building is going to be based in front of the station. Would the First Minister agree that a well-connected, easily accessible, customer-friendly bus service is absolutely essential to help fulfil the Welsh Government's policy of shifting people from cars to public transport, and especially when the number of people using the bus service in Cardiff is actually going down at the moment?
Very much so. I think integration is absolutely key to public transport. There are some good examples around Wales of where this has happened. Caerphilly is probably the prime example that comes to mind. It's important that people are able to come off a train and go to one place where they can catch a bus to anywhere in that city or town. My hometown of Bridgend was without a bus station for many years. It just didn't work. Nobody knew where the bus stops were, and as a result, it was very difficult for people to negotiate the bus network. I do think that it's important that there's a bus station, or at least one place where all buses leave to parts of a city, and that place necessarily must be next to a railway station.
Rina Biowydd.
Diolch, Llywydd. The top priority for infrastructure investment in public transport in Wales now is rail electrification. Now, even before the new Secretary of State for Wales was appointed, a spokesman for your government said that he was a man you could do business with. You need to strike a deal with him very, very soon on rail electrification after you failed to seal the deal last time. What's your strategy?
Actually, the deal wouldn't be with him. It would be with Mr Patrick McLaughlin, who is in fact the Department of Transport Minister. The Wales office has an observer role in that regard, not the role in terms of agreeing a settlement. But we do very much welcome what we hope will be a new approach and a new attitude from the Wales office. I do have to say that I know that my colleagues have dealt with the new Secretary of State in the past and have found him to be pragmatic and reasonable, if I can put it that way, remembering, of course, the obvious political difficulties and differences that are there. And yes, I think there is potential there now to move forward with an agreement with regard to the rail network with the support of the new Secretary of State.
Helen Barrett.
Diolch, Llywydd. I note the Minister for Transport yesterday released a formal feedback mechanism for rail passengers, which I'm sure you'll agree was very well timed. However, one piece of feedback that regular passengers on the Valleys lines often give is that their services are overcrowded. Now, the completion of electrification projects such as the Manchester to Liverpool line, which are due for completion this year, should release some diesel rolling stock into the leasing system. And I'm wondering what discussions the Welsh Government has had with the rail industry to secure a short-term lease on some of this diesel stock to alleviate overcrowding whilst we wait for our own electrification project to be completed.
Well, these are, of course, issues that are always dealt with, where rolling stock can come from, but the franchise is coming close to renewal, and it's important that there is a longer-term solution to overcrowding on the Valley lines. We hope, of course, that electrification will be delivered to ensure that we have a transport system for the South Wales Metro that is a 21st century system rather than one from the 20th century that is struggling to keep up with demand.
Sandy Moyes.
Thank you. First Minister, Guide Dogs Cymru are campaigning for public transport operators to introduce audio announcements on their services. These will allow blind and visually impaired people to travel more freely. Arriva Buses Wales are doing just that on some routes in North Wales this summer. So can I ask, First Minister, what steps are the Welsh Government taking to encourage all bus operators and public transport operators to introduce audio services and services like them to ensure that people who have a visual impairment can travel as freely as you or I?
I can say that the Minister met representatives of Guide Dogs Cymru and the RNIB earlier this year to discuss the Talking Buses campaign. The Minister has asked the Bus Policy Advisory Group to advise on how to encourage a more sustainable bus network, which of course includes making buses more attractive to more passengers. That group has been considering a Talking Buses campaign, along with proposals for a charter for disabled public transport passengers. And I can say the group recently submitted its advice to the Minister, who is now considering the recommendations.
Question 7, William Powell.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. Will the First Minister please make a statement on the importance of agricultural shows such as the Royal Welsh to Wales?
Well, the Royal Welsh is one of the finest events of its kind in Europe, no question about that. I'm looking forward to attending this year's show. It's an important showcase of what Wales has to offer. And of course, we must remember the county shows that take place around Wales. And I was very glad to be at the Bridgend County Show, which took place last weekend.
I'd like to thank the First Minister very much for that response. One thing that would enhance further the Royal Welsh in terms of sustainability would be to make it more accessible to those members of the public wishing to access the site via public transport. While it's welcome that Arriva trains do lay on a bus shuttle from the Heart of Wales line at Builth Road to Llanelwedd, there are no additional services provided. First Minister, given the importance of the Royal Welsh, which attracts annually almost twice as many visitors as the Glastonbury Festival, and given your recent engagement with Arriva Trains, could you consider using your influence to urge Arriva Trains Wales to look at the commercial opportunities around laying on additional services that would also benefit the show and the wider travelling public?
Yes, I think it's worth Arriva certainly considering that. They do it, of course, with a special train that runs to Builth Road from, well, it used to be Rumney, through the Swansea District line and then up on the Heart of Wales line. I suspect that one of the issues, of course, is that most of the travel will take place at a certain time of day to the show. So they obviously put that train on from the south, and they will need to assess whether it's in their commercial interest to lay on more services in the future.
Russell George.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm also looking forward to attending Europe's largest agricultural show next week. One of the key talking points at the show will be the long-term state of the red meat industry in Wales. We saw just last week the fall in prices for in-season Welsh lamb, which is concerning on the back of the slump in Welsh beef prices. Can I ask First Minister how the Welsh Government will be using the Royal Welsh Show to reiterate to retailers and processors to back Welsh farming and Welsh red meat?
Well, HCC certainly do a very good job in terms of supporting the red meat industry in Wales. The key has always been to ensure there are more markets for Welsh meat. That is something that I started when I was Rural Affairs Minister, when I first went to Dubai to open the market there, and other countries have opened up now to Welsh meat as well. By having more markets available, then of course it's possible to sell in those markets that offer the best price. Simple market economics, and something that increasingly applies to Welsh farming.
Leo Griffiths.
Diolch Llywydd. Mae'r Pwyllgor Amgylchedd a Chyfladwyedd wrth gwrs bob blwyddyn yn cynnal cyfarfod sydd fel arfer yn sesiwn graffu weinidogol yn sioe bawb bob blwyddyn. A mae yn lwyfan pwysig, dwi'n meddwl, i ddangos democratiaeth ar waith a hefyd mae'n gyfle i graffu ar waith Llywodraeth Cymru yn newid y prior nawr, dwi'n ymwybodol wrth gwrs bod y newidiadau gweinidogol wedi digwydd yn wythnos diwethaf. Ond a fydde Llywodraeth Prif Weinidog yn gallu sicrhau y bydd y gweinidog neu'r Prif Weinidog
or Deputy Minister is in attendance at that meeting, because failing to do so would send a very unfortunate message to the sector.
This is an issue that we will have to consider, of course, the changes last week were not pre-planned, and so, of course, we didn't wish to bring anybody new into the Cabinet at present, and of course these changes will be under consideration for some time until the environment goes one way and rural affairs goes the other.
Question 8, Julie James.
Diolch Llawedd. Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government action to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping in Wales?
Yes, the Housing Bill will significantly strengthen the duties on local authorities to prevent and relieve homelessness for anyone at risk. We will introduce national monitoring of rough sleepers this year, and we are exploring with our partners additional measures to help people into settled accommodation.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. First Minister, in Swansea, we successfully recently lobbied the Halifax to remove so-called homeless spikes from the front of its premises in the city centre. As rough sleepers are very rarely choosing to be on the streets, it's a very dangerous place to be anyway, and it seems completely heartless and quite medieval to prevent people from taking what shelter they can find in a city centre. Labour councillors in Swansea today are hoping to get a motion through Swansea Council calling on the Welsh Government to ban such spikes from suitable premises in the city centre. And whilst we all agree that that's not the solution we want for rough sleepers, it does seem to send the right signal in terms of the humanity of the situation. First Minister, would you comment on that resolution and the Welsh Government's possible response to it?
Yes, I think public pressure can be brought to bear here. I understand that Halifax recently removed their anti-homeless spikes following pressure and public opinion. Of course, they're not the use of spikes is not the appropriate way of dealing with rough sleepers. It doesn't solve the underlying problem. And that's why, of course, the bill will help to encourage organisations to work together to encourage rough sleepers to look for accommodation in their own interest, of course, and for their own safety in the future. And, of course, the bill looks to help that process by improving services for those people who are not in priority need and for those who are found to be intentionally homeless.
Nick Ramsey.
Thanks. First Minister, it's well documented that a significant number of younger homeless people certainly have been in the care system in one form or another, and clearly have been let down by some element of that system, not overall, but some element leading to their current situation. Care charities have commended the UK government decision to allow foster children to remain with their foster families until 21, and the Action for Children and Fostering Network Wales have suggested that councils in Wales could have a statutory obligation to do that. Have you made an assessment of what the cost would be of doing that in some way of Wales, so that children in care are cared for in some way up till 21, and how that cost is balanced with the benefits that would result in taking people off the street?
I know the Minister is aware of what is proposed to happen in England, and I know she is looking at the implications of that as far as Wales is concerned.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog yn
First Minister, I very much appreciate your response to Julie James' question and the emphasis that this isn't the way to deal with people who are homeless. But are you aware of the fact that steps have been taken outside the Labour Party's HQ in London to prevent people from sleeping rough there? Not spikes, it is true to say, but there is uneven paving which has been placed there deliberately in order to deter people from sleeping there overnight. Will you hold some discussions with Labour Party officials in London to ensure that they aren't operating in the same way?
Well, I was unaware of that, I have to say, and I will consider that in listen to what the member had to say.
Diolch Lywyd. Prif Weinidog, fi'n croesawu'r bil tai ar y gweddiad digartref. Mae etholwraig o Llanelli wedi bod mewn cyswllt â fi'n ddiweddar. Oherwydd newidiadau mewn diwygiadau llys, mae hi methu cael mynediad i dyn cyngor, ac oherwydd reolau newydd ynghylch amseroedd a mathau o fuddaliadau, mae wedi profi'n anodd ffeindio llety dros dro neu parhaus gyda darparwyr eraill. Ydych chi'n cytuno ro fi bydd y bil tai o gefnogaeth mewn
will be of assistance in cases such as this.
The aim, of course, is to ensure that we give assistance to people in that position, and of course to ensure that we can reduce the detrimental effects of changes emanating from Westminster.
Question 9, Andrew Sandbach.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, will you provide an update on how many times Welsh Government has been ordered to provide disclosure of information following an appeal to the Information Commissioner?
Since 2011, 52 appeals have gone to the Information Commissioner. 8 of those appeals have resulted in the Welsh Government releasing further information.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. It's regrettable that in terms of questions which are often tabled to ministers, which are then not answered, and Freedom of Information Act requests are then put in, leading to information being disclosed, that it appears that the transparent and open government that you were hoping to achieve isn't in fact in place. I asked you some time ago whether you would place in the library all the material that had been relied upon for Sir Derek Jones's report. Can you confirm whether or not you've now done that? Because that material has been requested under the Freedom of Information Act.
It's in the report. Everything that members need to be aware of is in the report. That's why the report is in the library. Can I say, she talks about a lack of transparency. Just to say to her that of the Freedom of Information requests that we receive, 0.2% have led to information being released further as a result of an appeal. That is a good figure. It compares with the UK government, who in fairness are slightly lower, 0.07%. Scottish government is higher, 2.24%. In terms of compliance, I can say that in terms of ensuring that requests are completed within the statutory time of 20 working days, we are ahead of anywhere else in the UK. In 2013, our compliance rate was 93%, 91% in Whitehall, 74% in Scotland, 79% in 2012 in Northern Ireland. That shows that we are indeed a transparent government.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, President Officer. What guidance do you give generally as a government to the public sector in Wales on the Freedom of Information Act and general use of data and information? It's becoming more and more apparent that some public bodies are using the Act in a way that it wasn't intended. That is, they treat every application for information as an application under the Act. I would say that that's not appropriate. On occasion, information needs to be disclosed as a matter of course. Information should be available. A way of dealing with the public is stated if you ask for information, we will treat it as a request under the Act. It is something that precludes the ordinary citizen from actually seeking information, in my opinion. Will you look at this practice, which I believe is developing particularly among our health boards?
Well, it's difficult because what also happens, of course, is that sometimes people request something, and if it's not treated as a request under the Act itself, they also complain. And it would be easier if people were to say, and I understand that not everybody understands this, that if in the email or the letter that they submit to the public body, they should say whether this is a request under the Act itself or whether it's just a general request for information. I understand that you can't expect people to know or to make that distinction, but if they did know, it would be easier for bodies to decide how they should deal with any request. And of course, for members, it would be easy for members to do so.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item